The Old Testament book of Exodus tells the story of Moses, the great Hebrew prophet who led his people out of slavery in Egypt. Exodus also depicts some of the most dramatic events in the Bible, events that have sparked the human imagination for more than 3,000 years. Moses is directly involved in all of them.
The stories about Moses in the book of Exodus in the Hebrew Bible are probably the best known stories that are in the entire Bible.
Moses is born to a family that's enslaved. The challenge is that the king, the Pharaoh of Egypt, at the beginning of the story, has ordered that all male children of the Hebrews, the Israelites, need to be killed. He's worried that they're becoming too numerous, and that if they are too numerous, that they will eventually rise up and overthrow the Egyptians. So baby Moses has to be saved from Pharaoh and from the soldiers that might want to kill him.
Now Moses' mother hides him for 3 months, reaches a point where she can't hide him any longer, so she builds a basket and puts him in the reeds along the banks of the Nile.
She placed the basket near the place in the river that Pharaoh's daughter typically went to bathe. And the stage is set for this dramatic rescue.
Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river, and she goes to bathe and hears his cry and decides to take him in. In fact, Pharaoh's daughter decides to raise Moses as her own and even hires his real mother to help with the raising of the child.
As far as anyone is concerned, Moses is now a member of the Egyptian population. He is raised as an Egyptian. He spends his life as a prince.
But he's also aware of his heritage. And that becomes the tension as the story begins, the choice he has between Egypt and his own people. Exodus recounts a moment in Moses' life where he sees a Hebrew slave being beaten by an Egyptian man. He decides to take justice into his own hands and kills the Egyptian man essentially in cold blood.
When the Egyptian court found out about this, Moses knew he was going to be executed, and off he goes, out of Egypt into the wilderness.
He abandons everything that he grew up with and flees to the desert to this place called Midian, which is in the northwestern corner of what today would be Saudi Arabia.
This is a major change of fortunes for Moses. He has gone from being an Egyptian prince to an exile. He is essentially out there in this sort of hilly territory. He is a shepherd. He's tending these sheep, and something dramatic happens to him that he never would have expected.
He ends up coming to this mountain. It's Mount Horeb, which is the mountain of God. And while there, he encounters this incredible miraculous sight.
He sees something he cannot explain, and that's a bush that is burning without being consumed. And he goes a little bit closer to see what it is, and he hears God's voice speaking to him from out of this bush. The voice of God tells Moses that he needs to go back to Egypt and save his people from the Egyptian Pharaoh.
Moses is going to be the guy who brings the Israelites out of Egypt.
Moses returns and demands that Pharaoh let the Hebrews go.
Unsurprisingly, the Pharaoh is not particularly inclined to release the Hebrew people. God doesn't like this and sends a catastrophic series of plagues. And after that, the Hebrews are allowed to leave.
But Pharaoh changes his mind, and he sends a massive army to recapture all of them or kill them. This leads to the greatest miracle of all, in which God miraculously parts, opens up a passage through the sea for all the Israelites to cross through.
It's one of the Old Testament's greatest escapes, the parting of the Red Sea.
The parting of the Red Sea is one of the most dramatic events in the Bible. Here's Moses and the Israelites fleeing from Pharaoh and Pharaoh's army. They come to the sea. Well, how are they going to cross the sea?
The Israelites see the Egyptians coming and they're just thrown. Why would Moses bring them out of Egypt only to have the Egyptians kill them? Moses takes this concern to God, and God says, not to worry, I have this under control. You're going to take your staff and split the sea. So Moses does as God instructs. Moses extends the staff, and the water divides.
So the Israelites can walk across on dry land. The Egyptians follow them, and once the Israelites are safe on the other side, the water collapses and drowns Pharaoh's army.
Some scientists argue there is a scientific way to understand what took place. For some, the Minoan eruption on the island we now call Santorini doesn't simply explain the 10 plagues. It can also be used to explain the parting of the Red Sea.
This theory is based on a rather widely held notion that there might actually be a mistranslation in English Bibles, that the parting didn't actually occur at the Red Sea.
In Hebrew, the phrase that's usually translated as the Red Sea actually is 2 words, the Yam Suf. Now, Yam is easy. That definitely refers to a sea. The question is whether we've gotten Suf right by saying that that's red. The other translation of Suf is actually more like reeds, which would mean we're not talking about the Red Sea, but the Sea of Reeds, a body of water that was much, much shallower than the Red Sea would have been.
The location of this Sea of Reeds is also subject to debate.
There is one location in Egypt which could be a candidate for something called the Sea of Reeds, and it's called Lake Bala. It actually doesn't exist anymore because in the 19th century, with the building of the Suez Canal, it just kind of got obliterated.
But during the time of Moses, this would have been a substantial shallow lake.
According to this theory, earthquakes triggered by the Minoan eruption would have caused the Nile Delta to slide off the African continental plate. This would have led to massive disruptions of land, causing shifts with water moving from higher ground to lower ground.
So you have the people crossing over the Sea of Reeds, which is very shallow water, and then with this catastrophic movement of this continental shelf and the Nile Delta waters pouring into it, that would have caused the waters to come rushing back in and devastate the Egyptians who were trying to cross.
And in the story, we have the Egyptian army drowned in a massive wave.
When you have a very strong wind blowing persistently for many, many hours, it can literally take the water of a lake and displace it, move it from one shoreline to the other, so that you dry the surface on the upwind side and pile up water on the downwind side.
You see this regularly in Lake Erie, where water levels around Toledo, Ohio might be 16 feet higher than around Buffalo, New York.
Atmospheric modeling of a wind setdown looks exactly like the story in the book of Exodus. The Exodus narrative talks about a strong wind and a strong wind that blows for hours, which is precisely what you would need for a wind setdown.
Atmospheric researcher Carl Drews notes that there are 4 aspects to a wind setdown. 1, it takes hours of a strong wind blowing. 2, it exposes the bottom of a body of water. Thirdly, the effect is greater in shallow water. And fourthly, the event can be reversed in minutes. You might be a religious believer or not, but science has demonstrated that, at least at some critical moment, natural phenomena could produce the kinds of things we find in the Exodus story that would have aided the liberation and survival of an entire people.